Black CEO told to get lost by receptionist minutes later. She destroys their entire company. Hello everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories. The day began like any other. But for Jessica Collins, it was the start of a storm. With a quiet confidence, she entered the sleek, modern lobby of Brightwell Enterprises, the city's towering symbol of power and success. Dressed in a simple charcoal cashmere sweater that whispered elegance and understated luxury, Jessica made no attempt to draw attention. There were no flashy logos or showy accessories to betray her wealth, just an aura of quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. She moved effortlessly through the lobby, her every step measured, as if the ground beneath her feet had already acknowledged her presence. Ashley Blake, the receptionist, barely glanced up from her phone. But when she did, her eyes flickered with disdain, taking in the sight of the well-dressed woman standing before her, too polished, too dignified for a company like Brightwell, in her eyes. A single glance at Jessica's dark skin, her modest yet impeccable attire, and Ashley immediately decided that this woman was out of place. Deliveries go around the back, Ashley sneered, her voice thick with the arrogance of someone who thought they held power over others. Without a second thought, she signaled the security guards to escort Jessica out. Nearby, Mark Sullivan, the executive vice president, witnessed the scene unfold. A knowing look passed across his face. But he said nothing. He recognized Jessica. Of course, Carter Tech's CEO. A woman with more power than most men in the room combined, but instead of stepping in, he allowed the humiliation to continue. The silence of his inaction rang louder than any words could. As Jessica was escorted out, her expression remained unfazed, calm, almost serene. But inside, a storm was brewing. She had seen it all before. The condescending glances, the dismissive attitudes. But this time, she wasn't going to let it slide. Her mind was already turning, formulating a plan, calculating the precise moment when she would strike. The humiliation she faced today would not go unanswered. Jessica Collins wasn't just a woman to be overlooked. She was a force to be reckoned with. And Brightwell Enterprises would soon learn that. Ashley Blake's smirk widened as she watched the security guards close in on Jessica, like wolves encircling their prey. The cold blue of her eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she thought of the power she held over the woman she had dismissed so easily. The heavy footsteps of the guards echoed in the lobby as they seized Jessica's arms, their grip firm and unyielding, like an animal being dragged away. But Jessica, despite the indignity, did not flinch. Her gaze remained steady, focused, piercing through the building's glass doors as if she could already see the path she would take next. With each step toward the exit, Ashley's voice rang in the air, laced with mockery. "People like you always think they belong," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for Jessica to hear. "They never know their place." Jessica's hand clenched subtly around the sleeve of her cashmere sweater, the only outward sign of her rising fury. She could feel the sting of the insult, sharp and burning, but she swallowed it down, letting it fuel her resolve instead of consuming her. She refused to show them weakness. As they reached the door, Jessica halted for a split second, her head lifting slightly. The familiar face of Mark Sullivan stood in the background, his cold eyes watching her, unmoving. He didn't speak, he didn't intervene, he let the scene play out, letting the injustice unfold as if it was just another game to him. But Jessica, though outwardly calm, knew exactly what this was. This wasn't just a mistake, this was a message. The doors slammed open, and Jessica was pushed out onto the sidewalk. The harsh sunlight blinded her for a moment, but she stood tall, not a single word escaping her lips. Behind her, Brightwell's gleaming logo reflected the city's skyline, a towering testament to its power. But for Jessica, it was a symbol of everything that was wrong. And as the security guards retreated into the building, and the door closed behind her, Jessica pulled out her phone, her fingers moving with calculated precision. Execute Plan B. Cancel the deal with Brightwell. Immediately, her voice was steady, each word wrapped in quiet fury. And as she hung up, a faint, cold smile played on her lips. This wasn't over. In fact, this was only the beginning. By the time the afternoon sun had dipped low in the sky, the first tremors of Brightwell Enterprises' collapse were already beginning to ripple through the financial world. It started subtly, Almost imperceptibly, a few whispered exchanges between brokers. A cautious glance exchanged between analysts. Then, the stock ticker flashed on every screen, broadcasting the devastating reality. Brightwell's shares were plummeting. A freefall with no end in sight. Panic spread like wildfire through the trading floors. Investors scrambled, desperately trying to sell their shares before the damage became irreversible. Within hours, Brightwell Enterprises, the company that had once stood tall, its name synonymous with power and success, was unrecognizable. The news rippled across the globe. Carter Tech had withdrawn from their long-anticipated partnership with Brightwell, severing ties in the most public and calculated manner possible. The stock market reacted with brutal swiftness. Shares of Brightwell were sold off at a record pace. And by the end of the day, its market value had been slashed by hundreds of millions of dollars. As the numbers spiraled downward, Jessica Collins, the woman who had triggered it all, watched from her office. Her face remained calm, unreadable. As she studied the reports on her screen, there was no satisfaction in her eyes. No gloating smile. This wasn't personal. It was strategy. The fall of Brightwell wasn't the result of a single decision, but the culmination of years of arrogance, of discrimination, and of a toxic corporate culture that Jessica had witnessed firsthand. Brightwell had underestimated her, dismissed her, humiliated her, and now, in return, it was paying the price. The phone calls and emails began flooding in, each one more frantic than the last. Each one filled with the same underlying panic. Jessica's withdrawal from the partnership wasn't just a financial hit, it was a statement. The kind of statement that made every business leader sit up and take notice. The consequences of their actions, of their disrespect, had now been laid bare for the world to see. But Jessica wasn't done. She knew this was only the beginning. The real work was yet to come. Mark Sullivan stood in the shadows, his arms crossed, eyes cold and calculating as he watched the chaos unfold below. He didn't flinch, didn't stir, even as Jessica Collins was escorted out of the building like a criminal. The hum of the lobby was thick with murmurs. But Mark's focus was unwavering. He had seen it all, yet said nothing. The woman who had been so carelessly dismissed, Jessica Collins, the very woman Brightwell had been courting for a partnership that could have changed everything, was now nothing more than a pawn in his game. In that moment, Mark's mind raced, working through the implications of the scene before him. The discomfort in the pit of his stomach wasn't guilt. No, it was something far more calculating, opportunity. He had been watching Brightwell's leadership shift in ways that made him uncomfortable. Richard Evans, the CEO, was too focused on maintaining old alliances and traditional relationships. Mark had no such loyalty. He saw Jessica's potential and feared what her company's success might mean for his own position within Brightwell. He had long suspected that a deal with Carter Tech was too risky, too progressive, too disruptive. But now, the path was clear. Jessica had been humiliated, rejected, and her pride wounded. It was a blow he had orchestrated, albeit unknowingly. But the result was just as he had hoped. Brightwell's partnership with Carter Tech was finished. And with it, any chance of securing the technological edge that would have ensured the company's future in an increasingly digital world. Mark didn't need to lift a finger to sabotage the deal. It had unraveled all on its own. And now, the fallout would do the work for him. As the security guards escorted Jessica to the doors, Mark allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smirk. He knew the endgame, knew exactly how this would play out. His silence had sealed the deal. With Jessica's departure, Brightwell's reputation was irreparably damaged. And in the chaos that would follow, he would step into the void. What happened today wasn't just about a single business deal, it was a power play. A calculated move to weaken Richard Evans and strengthen Mark's own hold over the company. And as the lobby door closed behind Jessica, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. The storm was coming, but it would not touch him. He was prepared, and he would emerge unscathed. As Jessica Collins' figure faded into the bustling city, the storm that would soon ravage Brightwell Enterprises was already gathering force. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and without hesitation, she answered. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was an unmistakable sense of urgency in the tone. Plan B, Miss Collins, came the directive. It's in motion. With a single, fluid motion, Jessica's fingers tapped a few keys on her phone. sending an order through to her legal and PR teams. Her voice crisp as she issued the command. Cancel the entire deal with Brightwell. Immediately. No delays. There was no hesitation in her words. No doubt in her voice. This was not an act of vengeance, but a calculated move in a game she had been playing long before she'd stepped into Brightwell's lobby. The humiliation she'd endured was but a small spark. What was coming next would set the tech world on fire. As her car glided smoothly through the traffic, she gazed out the window, her face a picture of serene determination. The fate of a corporation had been sealed, and Jessica had made it happen with precision. Back at Brightwell, the phone lines were already lighting up with frantic calls from shareholders, partners, and investors, each one scrambling to understand why the sudden change had occurred. By the time the CEO, Richard Evans, was able to grasp the gravity of the situation, it was already too late. The deal with Carter Tech was off, and the financial implications were devastating. Brightwell's carefully constructed empire was beginning to crack. The ripple effect was felt instantly. Stock prices dropped, a stark reflection of the damage done. And with every passing minute, the damage deepened. Inside her luxury car, Jessica allowed herself a fleeting, quiet smile. This was her moment. The battle had only just begun. But in that moment, she knew she had struck the first decisive blow. She had played the game with finesse. And now, Brightwell would have to face the consequences of its own arrogance and misjudgments. Jessica Collins wasn't just a woman to be dismissed. She was a force of nature. And Brightwell Enterprises had just learned that the hard way. The ripple effect of Jessica's calculated move began to shake Brightwell Enterprises to its core. The tremors unmistakable and relentless. By the time the evening arrived, the financial markets had already begun their ruthless verdict. Brightwell's stock was plummeting. An unrelenting descent that mirrored the company's rapidly deteriorating reputation. News outlets picked up the story with alarming speed, each headline more damning than the last. Carter Tech pulls out of strategic deal with Brightwell Enterprises. Rumors of internal turmoil emerge. Investors, once confident in Brightwell's future, now found themselves scrambling, desperate to salvage whatever was left of their investments. Panic set in, spreading across trading floors like wildfire. Inside Brightwell's towering headquarters, the tension was palpable. The once proud corporation, a symbol of prosperity and untouchable power, now stood on the brink of a catastrophic fall. Richard Evans, CEO of Brightwell, could feel the weight of the collapse pressing in on him. His phone never stopped ringing, each call more frantic than the last. But there was no answer that could fix the mess unfolding. His fingers trembled as he clutched the phone, trying in vain to restore order. But the damage was done. Jessica had been the match that lit the fire. And now the flames were consuming everything in their path. Meanwhile, Ashley Blake, the receptionist whose actions had unknowingly triggered this financial catastrophe, sat at her desk in oblivious calm. The latte in her hand was still warm, her smug smile untouched by the chaos that was rapidly escalating around her. She leaned back in her chair, her mind far removed from the panic that had overtaken the rest of the company. She whispered to her colleague, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. "People like her always think they belong," Ashley said, her voice laced with the same contempt she'd shown Jessica. "They don't know their place." But even as she spoke, the gravity of her mistake was beginning to settle in. Richard's voice, now full of fury, soon cut through the tension of the room. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he demanded. The words echoed throughout the lobby, cutting through the air like a knife. For the first time, Ashley's confidence wavered, her hands trembling slightly as she met his eyes. But it was too late. The consequences of her actions, of her arrogant dismissal of Jessica Collins, were already taking shape, and there would be no escaping them. As the evening wore on, news of Jessica's withdrawal spread, leaving Brightwell Enterprises reeling. The company's leadership, once untouchable, now found themselves on the defensive, trying to spin a narrative they could no longer control. The damage was irreversible, and the public outcry was just beginning. Brightwell's downfall had started with a single act of disdain, and now the corporation was spiraling toward a future none of its leaders could have predicted. Vanessa Walker stood frozen in the mezzanine, her hand gripping the cool metal of the railing as she watched the scene unfold below. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. every beat an echo of the guilt and frustration that had been building up inside her for years. She had seen this before, the subtle looks of disdain, the dismissive gestures, the unspoken rules of who truly belonged in the halls of Bridewell. But this time, it wasn't just a silent acceptance of the culture she had long tolerated. This time, it was different. Watching Jessica Collins, the powerful CEO of Carter Tech, being treated like an intruder. Being shoved out of the building with no respect, no dignity, it broke something inside Vanessa. Her fists clenched at her sides, the anger threatening to spill over. But she stood frozen, paralyzed by the weight of the moment. She wanted to scream, to run down and stop the madness, to be the one to stand up and say enough. But she knew the consequences. She knew that one word, one action, could end her career at Bridewell. Instead, Vanessa could only watch as Jessica was escorted out of the building. Her expression unyielding, her posture tall and composed despite the injustice being inflicted upon her. Vanessa's stomach churned with a mixture of admiration and shame. How had it come to this? How had she allowed herself to remain complicit in this toxic environment for so long? As Jessica was pushed through the door, her sharp gaze flicked upward, locking eyes with Vanessa for a brief moment. There was no anger in Jessica's eyes, only an unnerving calm. A quiet strength that pierced through Vanessa like a spear. It was a look that said, "I see you," but it wasn't an accusation. It was a reminder of everything Vanessa had endured and everything she could still change. The door closed behind Jessica, and Vanessa's heart ached with the weight of what had just transpired. Her legs felt like they were made of stone, as though they could no longer support her. She wanted to do something, anything, but she was trapped in her own silence. A silence that had been cultivated over years of watching and doing nothing. The shame burned in her chest, the guilt too heavy to ignore. But as Jessica disappeared from view, Vanessa's resolve slowly began to harden. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. She wouldn't allow herself to stay silent any longer. Something had to change, and if it meant leaving Bridewell behind, then so be it. Vanessa knew that this moment, this decision, would define everything that came next. The time for silence was over. The time for action had arrived. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling for Vanessa Walker. The shame and frustration that had once been buried deep inside her began to surface, turning into a sharp, undeniable urgency to act. She couldn't stay at Bridewell. Couldn't continue to be a part of a system that had so carelessly discarded someone like Jessica Collins. It was a choice between silence or defiance. And Vanessa knew she could no longer remain a passive observer. When the call finally came, when the offer from Carter Tech arrived, it was like a door had opened that she hadn't even realized had been there. Jessica Collins had seen her. She had seen Vanessa's potential, her talents, and most importantly, her quiet strength. The offer to join Carter Tech wasn't just a career opportunity, it was a lifeline. A chance to finally break free from the suffocating chains of discrimination that had kept her in the shadows for so long. The promise of working on a groundbreaking project in cybersecurity, leading a division that would redefine the industry, it was everything she had ever wanted, but had never been given the chance to prove. When Vanessa walked into the Carter Tech offices for the first time, it was as if the air itself was different. There was a sense of purpose, a buzz of excitement that she had never felt at Bridewell. This was a place where talent was valued, where voices like hers were heard and celebrated. The space was alive with energy, filled with people who were driven by more than just success. They were driven by the desire to create something meaningful. Jessica greeted her personally, her warm smile a stark contrast to the cold indifference Vanessa had grown used to. In that moment, Vanessa realized how much she had been holding back, how much of herself had been suffocated under the weight of years of neglect and prejudice. Now, here she was, standing at the threshold of a new chapter, not just as an employee, but as a leader, with a chance to make a real impact. Under Jessica's guidance, Vanessa quickly became an integral part of Carter Tech's mission. She was entrusted with the responsibility of overseeing the AI-based cybersecurity project, a multi-billion-dollar initiative that would change the way the tech world thought about security. It was everything she had dreamed of, everything she had fought for in the quiet corners of Bridewell, and now it was within her grasp. But it wasn't just the project that mattered. It was the culture of Carter Tech, the sense of belonging that came with it. For the first time in her career, Vanessa felt truly seen, truly valued, and it was all because Jessica had recognized something in her that no one at Brightwell ever had. Vanessa knew she owed Jessica everything. And as she took her place at the head of the division, leading her team with confidence, she couldn't help but smile. This was where she was meant to be. This was her moment. And nothing, no one, would ever take it away from her again. Ashley Blake sat in the sterile, dimly lit break room of the small customer service center, the hum of the fluorescent lights above echoing in her ears. The office was a far cry from the glamorous, high-powered world of Brightwell Enterprises, and she could feel the weight of her fall pressing down on her with every passing second. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred her cold coffee, the taste bitter on her tongue, much like the reality she now faced. Gone were the days of walking confidently through the halls of Brightwell. The days when her name had carried weight. Now, her name was a stain, a permanent mark of disgrace that no one would forget. Her phone buzzed on the table in front of her, and for a moment, Ashley considered ignoring it, but she knew better. It was the call she had been dreading, the one that had been coming ever since Jessica Collins' lawsuit had been filed. She picked up the phone, her heart racing, and held it to her ear, her breath shallow. "Hello?" she said, her voice barely audible. The voice on the other end was cold, devoid of any sympathy. "Miss Blake, this is the attorney for Miss Jessica Collins. I'm calling to inform you that you have been officially named in a lawsuit for racial discrimination and defamation. The amount for damages is $2 million. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She felt the blood drain from her face as the phone slipped from her trembling hand, landing on the table with a soft thud. She stared at it for a moment, the reality of what she had done crashing down on her. $2 million. The number echoed in her mind, a figure so large that it might as well have been a mountain she could never climb. She sank back into her chair, her head spinning. How had it all gone so wrong? Just a few months ago, she had been living a life of privilege and power, the smug receptionist who could look down on others without a second thought. Now, she was a pariah, shunned by former colleagues, avoided by recruiters, and facing the consequences of her cruelty. Her arrogance had cost her everything. The next few days were a blur. Rejection letters piled up, each one more crushing than the last. Every interview ended the same way, no explanation. Just polite refusals that came with a sharp, knowing glance at her name on the resume. The whispers followed her everywhere. A constant reminder of the woman she had once been. A woman who had thought herself untouchable, who had believed that her position and privilege would shield her from the consequences of her actions. But the consequences came, relentless and unforgiving. Her savings dwindled as the calls from debt collectors began. She found herself isolated, abandoned by the friends and colleagues who had once praised her. The loneliness was suffocating, the silence deafening, and in those quiet moments, Ashley found herself questioning everything. Why had I done it? It was in the depths of this despair that the phone rang again. This time, she knew exactly what it was, the final blow. The thing that would ruin her for good. But when she picked it up, the voice on the other end was not the one she expected. It was calm, firm. "Miss Blake, this is the office of Miss Jessica Collins. We are offering you one last chance to make amends. The $2 million settlement will be converted into community service. You will work with an organization supporting minority communities." The words hung in the air, a strange mixture of relief and humiliation. This wasn't just an offer. It was a last chance, a final opportunity to redeem herself. But Ashley knew that redemption came at a price. She had to face the consequences of her actions, had to confront the ugly truths about herself that she had spent so long ignoring. With a shaking voice, Ashley whispered, "I accept." It wasn't much, but it was all she had left. The towering Brightwell building, once a symbol of power and success, now stood as a hollow monument to its own demise. Vanessa Walker walked past its shattered reputation, her gaze unwavering as she entered the new, thriving headquarters of Carter Tech. With Jessica Collins by her side, Vanessa felt a weight lift off her shoulders, replaced by a sense of purpose she had never known at Brightwell. The Carter Center for Innovation was born from the ashes of Brightwell's collapse. A place where the mistakes of the past could be rewritten, where opportunity flourished regardless of race or background. The energy in the building was electric, alive with hope, creativity, and the promise of change. Vanessa was no longer a silent witness to injustice. She was the leader of something meaningful. Something that would outlast the toxic legacy of Brightwell. This was her new beginning, and nothing, no one, would ever take it from her.